When I announced my pregnancy, my mother-in-law said, "Abort it before you curse our family with a defective child." I still remember the silence after she said it. Not because I didn't hear her. Because my brain refused to believe someone could say something so cruel about an unborn child. Especially someone who was supposed to become a grandmother. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for almost 2 years when we found out we were expecting. It wasn't a planned pregnancy. But from the moment I saw those 2 lines on the test, I felt something I had never experienced before. A kind of love that appeared before I had even met the person. I spent the next few weeks secretly preparing a small announcement for our families. I bought a tiny pair of white baby shoes. I wrapped them in a small box. I imagined my mother crying happy tears. I imagined Daniel's parents smiling as they realized they were becoming grandparents. I was naive, because I thought everyone would be happy. Daniel's mother, Victoria, had always been difficult. Not openly cruel. That would have been easier. She was the type of person who hid criticism behind concern. She commented on my cooking, my clothes, my career, the way I decorated our apartment. Everything was always presented as advice, but somehow, every conversation left me feeling smaller. Daniel always told me not to take it personally. He said his mother was old-fashioned, that she meant well. I wanted to believe him. After all, she was his mother. And I wanted us to have a good relationship. When we arrived at his parents' house to share the news, I was nervous but excited. Victoria had prepared dinner. The whole family was there. I thought it was perfect timing. After dessert, Daniel reached for my hand. We exchanged a smile. Then I placed the small gift box on the table. Everyone immediately understood. My father-in-law smiled. Daniel's sister gasped happily. For a few seconds, the room felt warm. Then Victoria opened the box. She looked at the tiny shoes, then at me. Her expression changed completely. At first, I thought she was shocked, maybe overwhelmed. Then she asked whether we had done any medical testing. I explained that we had scheduled appointments and everything looked normal so far. That was when the atmosphere changed. She started asking questions that felt less like concern, and more like an interrogation. She wanted to know about my family's medical history, my childhood illnesses, every detail. I answered honestly. Then came the sentence that shattered everything. She said she didn't want to risk bringing problems into their family. She suggested that ending the pregnancy would be the responsible choice. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody knew how to react. I looked at Daniel, waiting, hoping he would immediately defend me, defend our baby. Instead, he looked completely frozen. And that hurt almost as much as her words. Victoria continued. She talked about the family's reputation, their bloodline, their future. She acted as if our baby wasn't a person, just a possible inconvenience. I picked up the tiny shoes from the table. My hands were shaking. Not because I was angry, because I was heartbroken. The woman sitting across from me had spent years talking about wanting grandchildren. But the moment she found out she was getting one, she treated that child like a mistake. We left shortly afterward. The entire drive home was silent. Daniel kept his hands on the steering wheel. I stared out the window, waiting for him to say something. Anything. Finally, he apologized. Not for his mother. For staying quiet. He admitted he had been shocked. That he didn't know what to say. But I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. When someone insults you, you can defend yourself. When someone insults your unborn child, silence feels different. It feels like agreement. That night, I placed the tiny shoes back into their box. I didn't cry. I just sat there thinking about the future. About raising a child in a family where someone had already decided they weren't wanted. Then, 3 days later, I received a message from Victoria. I expected another apology. Instead, she sent me something that made my blood run cold. She had already started telling relatives that I was overreacting, and she had a plan to convince Daniel that I was the problem. I stared at the message for several minutes. Not because I was surprised, because deep down, I think I had already known. Victoria wasn't sorry. She wasn't regretting what she said. She was trying to control the story. That had always been her way. Whenever she hurt someone, she didn't apologize. She explained why they deserved it. I showed Daniel the message. This time, he didn't defend her. He didn't say she was just stressed. He didn't say I misunderstood. He finally saw what I had been seeing for years. His mother wasn't trying to fix a misunderstanding. She was trying to rewrite reality. The following week became one of the hardest periods of my life. Pregnancy was already emotional enough. My body was changing. My future was changing. I was trying to prepare myself to become a mother. But instead of feeling surrounded by support, I felt like I was preparing for a battle. Victoria started contacting family members. Not directly attacking me, she was smarter than that. She told people she was worried. She claimed she only wanted what was best for the baby. She suggested I was too sensitive, that I was letting hormones affect my judgment. Slowly, relatives started reaching out. Some asked if everything was okay. Others gently suggested that I should try to understand Victoria's perspective. I couldn't believe it. The person who had questioned whether my child should exist was now being treated like the victim. Then something happened that changed everything. Daniel's younger sister, Emma, called me. She had always been quiet around her mother, almost invisible. During that phone call, she finally told me the truth. Victoria had been like this for years. Not just with me. With everyone. She controlled every decision in the family. She judged people's appearances, careers, relationships. She had a picture in her head of what a perfect family should look like. Anyone who didn't fit that image became a problem. Emma admitted that she had spent years trying to earn her mother's approval. Nothing was ever enough. Then she said something that made me understand why Daniel had struggled to stand up to her. He had grown up believing keeping his mother happy was his responsibility. He wasn't just afraid of upsetting her. He had been trained to avoid conflict with her. That explained his silence, but it didn't excuse it. A few days later, Daniel and I sat down for a serious conversation. For the first time since we married, I saw him stop being his mother's son and start being my husband. He admitted that he had spent years avoiding difficult conversations because it was easier. Easier to ask me to ignore comments. Easier to pretend his mother didn't mean harm. Easier than confronting the person who raised him. But now there was someone else involved. Our child. He understood that staying quiet wasn't neutrality anymore. It was a choice. Together, we made a decision. We would not cut his family off immediately. But we would create boundaries. Strong ones. No more unexpected visits. No more insulting comments disguised as advice. No more conversations where my pregnancy became a topic for debate. Victoria wasn't going to have control over our child the way she had controlled everyone else. When Daniel told her, she reacted exactly how we expected. She accused me of turning him against her. She said I was destroying the family. She claimed I was keeping her away from her future grandchild. The irony was painful. She was angry about losing access to a child she had already rejected. For the first time, Daniel didn't apologize. He didn't try to make everyone comfortable. He simply stood by the decision. That seemed to shock her more than anything. Because for years, Victoria believed her son would always choose her. She didn't realize that becoming a father had changed him. Then, at my 20-week ultrasound appointment, something happened that made me realize how far everything had come. The doctor showed us our baby's heartbeat. A tiny, steady rhythm filling the room. Daniel held my hand tightly. And in that moment, I understood something. My child had already changed our lives. Before even being born. Because for the first time, Daniel had chosen his own family. The months that followed were not easy. Setting boundaries with Victoria didn't magically make her accept responsibility. If anything, it made her angrier. She was used to people eventually giving in. That was how every conflict in the family ended. Someone would apologize. Someone would compromise. Someone would quietly accept the blame just to restore peace. But this time was different. Daniel stopped trying to convince everyone to get along. He stopped explaining my feelings to his mother as if they were a misunderstanding. He simply made it clear that disrespect toward me meant losing access to both of us. And that included the baby. Victoria hated that. She began telling relatives that I was keeping her away from her grandchild out of spite. She described herself as a future grandmother being punished by an unreasonable daughter-in-law. The story might have worked, if people didn't know her. But after years of watching her behavior, some relatives started questioning things. Especially after Emma finally spoke up. For the first time in her life, she told other family members what growing up with Victoria had been like. She talked about constant criticism, impossible expectations, the feeling of never being good enough. Suddenly, the family started seeing a pattern. My pregnancy wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was simply the first time someone refused to accept it. A few months later, our daughter was born. I still remember that moment. The second I held her, every painful conversation, every cruel comment, every sleepless night of stress seemed to disappear. She was perfect. Not because she was flawless, Because she was ours. Daniel cried when he held her. Not the quiet tears he usually tried to hide. Real tears. He apologized for all the moments he hadn't protected me. For every time he asked me to ignore his mother's behavior. For every time he chose temporary peace over standing up for what was right. I didn't need him to be perfect. I needed him to understand. And finally, he did. For several weeks, Victoria didn't see the baby. She sent messages. Long ones. Some apologizing. Some blaming. Some asking for another chance. The problem was that every apology came with an excuse. She would say she was sorry for hurting me. Then immediately explain why she had been right to worry. She was sorry for her words, but she still believed her feelings mattered more than ours. Eventually, Daniel agreed to one meeting. Not at our house. Not with the baby present. A neutral place. When Victoria arrived, she looked different. Older. Less confident. For once, she wasn't walking into a room expecting everyone to adjust around her. She sat across from us quietly. Then she apologized. A real apology. At least, it started that way. She admitted that what she said about our daughter was cruel. She admitted she had been obsessed with the idea of a perfect family. She admitted she had judged a child who hadn't even entered the world. But then she said something that revealed she still didn't fully understand. She said she had only said those things because she loved her son. That was when Daniel finally responded. He explained that love doesn't give someone permission to destroy the people they claim to care about. He told her that protecting her feelings had cost him his ability to protect his wife. And he would never repeat that mistake. And for once. And Victoria had no answer. And because the person she expected to always choose her had finally chosen himself. And his family. And after that meeting, things slowly changed. Not perfectly. Not quickly. But genuinely. And Victoria started therapy. Not because anyone forced her. And because she finally realized she was losing the family she was so desperate to control. And months later, she visited our home. And she brought a small gift for our daughter. And a simple knitted blanket. And no expensive clothes. No dramatic speeches. Just a blanket she had made herself. And she placed it beside the baby and quietly admitted something. And she said she had spent so much time worrying about having a perfect grandchild, and that she forgot the only thing a child actually needs. And love. Ni didn't forget what she said. Ni never will. Some words leave scars. And but he also saw something important. And people can change. Not because they are forgiven. And because they finally face the consequences of who they have been. Years later, when my daughter was old enough to understand family stories, she asked me why her grandmother had been distant when she was born. Ni looked at her. Nat, her innocent face. And I smiled. Ni told her that sometimes adults make mistakes before they learn how to love properly. And sometimes, the smallest person in the family teaches everyone else the biggest lesson. And my mother-in-law once looked at my unborn child and saw a problem. No, she looks at her granddaughter and sees the greatest blessing she almost lost. And the truth is, nah, family isn't protected by pretending everything is fine. It's protected by the people brave enough to say when something isn't. And that was the moment our family finally began healing. 9 years passed, and our relationship with Victoria slowly became something I never thought was possible. Not perfect. Not like a movie where everyone suddenly forgets the pain and becomes inseparable. Real life doesn't work that way. Some wounds heal completely. Others leave small marks that remind you where you've been. I never forgot the night she told me to end my pregnancy. I never forgot the way she looked at my unborn child like a mistake instead of a miracle. But I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending those moments didn't happen. It means refusing to let those moments control the rest of your life. Victoria changed in small ways. The woman who once criticized everything I did started asking instead of assuming. She stopped giving unwanted advice. She stopped trying to control decisions that weren't hers. Most importantly, she stopped treating love like something people had to earn. The biggest change came after my daughter turned 3. Victoria was watching her play in the backyard. My daughter was running around with a toy in her hands, completely unaware of all the pain that happened before she was born. Victoria sat there quietly for a long time. Then she admitted something that surprised me. She said she had spent years imagining what kind of grandchild would make her proud. She wanted someone impressive, someone who would make the family look perfect. But when she finally met her granddaughter, she realized she had been searching for perfection in a child who only needed to be loved. That was the first time I believed her apology. Not because she said the right words, because she finally understood why they were wrong. Daniel also changed. Becoming a father forced him to confront things he had avoided his entire life. He no longer feared disappointing his mother. He no longer measured success by how happy everyone else was with him. He learned that being a good husband and father sometimes meant making someone uncomfortable. Especially when that someone had spent years hurting the people he loved. Looking back, the hardest part of that entire experience wasn't what Victoria said. It was the fear that my child would grow up surrounded by the same patterns. In a family where people stayed silent to avoid conflict. Where cruelty was excused as honesty. Where love came with conditions. But that cycle ended with us. And my daughter grew up knowing she was wanted. In every birthday. In every achievement. In every ordinary day. She never had to wonder whether she belonged. And that mattered more than anything. And people sometimes ask if I ever regret keeping my daughter connected to the woman who once rejected her. Answer is complicated. Don't regret allowing someone the chance to change. But I also don't regret setting boundaries. Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. And no one gets unlimited permission to hurt your family. When I look back at the tiny pair of baby shoes I bought for that first announcement, I still remember the pain of that night. Remember sitting there, holding them, wondering how someone could reject a child they had never met. But now those shoes sit in a memory box in my daughter's room. Not as a reminder of what almost happened. Not as a reminder of what was overcome. And my mother-in-law once told me my child would curse the family. And she was wrong. And my daughter didn't curse our family. And she changed it. And she forced us to confront the things everyone had ignored for years. And she taught her father to stand up. And she taught her grandmother humility. And she taught me that sometimes the people who try to break you accidentally reveal just how strong you can become. And the greatest victory wasn't proving my mother-in-law wrong. It wasn't watching her apologize. It wasn't seeing her regret her words. And the greatest victory was waking up every morning and knowing my child grows up in a home where she will never question whether she is loved. And because every child deserves that. No conditions. No expectations. No exceptions. Knows love. And thanks for reading.